So here we go. Senator Benjamin, welcome.
Thank you so much, Lorraine. I want to thank Three Parks for having me here this evening. I'm running for New York City Controller. I am the son of labor. Both of my parents are now retired on pensions. My mother was a secretary at Local 372 for DC 37, and my dad, a janitor at Stuyvesant High School, a part of 32 BJ's union. So for me, they're both retired on pensions and they need those pensions in order to live. And I think the first and most important role of the controller is to make sure that they're maximizing returns for those retirees. We have about $225 billion pension fund. And I think it's important that the next controller actually have asset management experience in order to do that. I have that experience. I went to Brown where I majored in public policy, and I went to Harvard Business School where I majored, so I specialized in financial management. And one of the roles I had after graduating business school was I spent time at Morgan Stanley where I did asset management for high net worth individuals and endowments, focusing on portfolio diversification, asset management. And one of the things, as I've been talking to the labor trustees, they want to make sure that the controller who comes in actually has that specific experience, because in a time like this, in a crisis where we're concerned about the economy, it is extremely important that we have someone who has that experience. Secondly, I want to thank the club for giving me the Ted Weiss Public Service Award, and you gave it to me for criminal justice reform efforts that I made and housing efforts that I made. And I just want to talk briefly on the criminal justice piece. When I got into the Senate, I was a ranking member of the Civil Service and Pensions Committee, and the first order of business for me was working with the New York State Controller, Tom DiNapoli, to divest the state pension fund from private prisons. We actually had $11.5 million of index fund related investments that were out there. And for
Senator,
me, that was
excuse
yes.
me a second. Senator, I want to apologize. Someone's talking in the background.
And I was talking over it.
Yeah, I was about to interrupt and say I'm going to mute everybody again, and that's going to mute Brian, and then he's going to have to unmute himself.
But it's Jane's phone, so Jane needs to make sure she stays muted.
Brian, unmute yourself and carry on.
Not a problem. As I was mentioning, I was hopefully that doesn't take away from my time, Lorraine.
No, we stopped for that, Brian.
Not a problem. But as I was saying, I'll go back to what I was saying. When I came to the Senate, I was ranking member of the Civil Service and Pensions Committee. And for me, one of the things I wanted to look at was what were the investments that the pension fund was making. And one of the places that I saw an issue was on the private prison side. We still, even though New York State was out of the private business, it was banned in New York from New York State, we still had a small amount of money that was invested in private prisons, and I thought that was unacceptable. So I introduced a bill calling for that divestment to happen. And then I worked with Controller Tom DiNapoli, and I'm proud to say that he administratively made the decision that he was going to divest from private prisons. Once that fight ended, then I turned to the banks. As many of us know, when you finance any company, there's the equity, which is what we had dealt with, but then there's also the lending, there's the credit facilities, there's the loans. And so I introduced a bill to make sure that banks that were New York State, that were New York chartered, cannot lend to private prisons, and was working with a number of banks who, quite frankly, on their own, made a decision to divest, to stop lending to private prisons. And so that's a kind of a sense of how I think morally there are certain investments that we should not be involved in. And as I know many of you are aware, New York City has made a decision, New York City Controller Scott Stringer, as well as the mayor, that we're going to divest from fossil fuels. There's a report that Controller Stringer is working on that will come out with a timeline and some guidelines around that. I will anxiously await that report, and I would work with the controller. And if I was so fortunate to be
Whoops, what's happened?
Senator, you're frozen. Senator. Oh, man.
Yeah,
Oh, no.
Brian's frozen on his end.
Senator, can you hear us? Ay, ay, ay.
Second, yes, I can. Can you hear? Can you hear me?
We can
Yeah.
hear you, but we can't see you. We can, oh, there
You
you're
can hear me
back.
and see me?
We,
Go
you
ahead.
were
You got it.
just saying about Scott Stringer and about if you're fortunate enough to be elected to controller.
Yes. So one of the things that Scott Stringer has is him and the mayor. They have been very clear that we will divest from fossil fuels. And there's a report that the controller is working on. When that report comes out, I will read it very aggressively and look to work with him and others to make sure that we divest fully from fossil fuels. So that is something that is on the radar screen. Turning my attention to one of the other roles of the controller, one of the roles of controller is also to be the chief fiscal officer of the city and to really look to make sure that the city budget is efficient. We should be looking at programmatic audits to make sure that there's accountability with every dollar spent, because if dollars are wasted, communities that are most marginalized, particularly communities of color, face a lot of the burdens of that. One of the places where I think we need to look is at the New York City Police Department. We really need to have a reckoning in this city around how policing occurs, how it's financed. In a number of cases in districts like mine, which you're a part of, a number of these scenarios, mental health is part of the conversation. And do we have the right people going out to deal with those issues? I think a lot of times we don't. And those are the kinds of things that need to be looked at. And we got to look at how we're funding the NYPD and how we are thinking about how those resources get allocated. But I think the most important issue is we need transparency around the numbers. And I think the controller should play that role.
Senator, this is Chuck Wall. I'm sorry. That's the 5-minute mark. So we're going to ask you to wrap it up and we'll move to questions.
All right. So really briefly, affordable housing. I believe that the controller should be investing in affordable housing in New York City. And I think particularly when it comes to homeless housing, we should be looking to acquire some of these hotels that are near bankruptcy so that we can put permanent supportive housing for those who are homeless. So I'll just leave it at that. I think it's a lot to do, and I'm anxious to get to work. Thank you very much. Sorry about that, Charles.
Thank you very much. We're going to start with a general question or two. First of all, what revenue producing steps would you recommend for New York City in this moment of crisis?
So a couple things. I think we should take a step back. I think we should look at revenue producing steps from the federal government and from the state government first. And so I think we are all very excited that a Biden administration is coming in, but we need desperately for the next stimulus package to include state and municipal discretionary funding so that we can help get back on our feet. So when COVID hit this country, it's a federal issue. Many states have had to close down so that we can protect ourselves, and it is important that the federal government plays a major role. Secondly, and I'm chair of the Budget and Revenues Committee at the state, we have to look at sort of increasing revenue. There are taxes that need to be increased. We need to look at how to do that best. I would chair a working group that is focused on coming up with some proposals. We're looking at very carefully at those. We have a retreat coming up next week. We're going to be talking about, I'll be leading the conversation on that conversation. So we need to look at some of that money coming from the federal government. There's some other ideas that many of us have talked about. So we'll be looking at that as well. And I think on the city level, one of the things that the city needs to take a look at is property taxes and how how they look at sales taxes, et cetera. But I think most of the action needs to come from the federal government and the state to help the city.
Here's a question from Beth Krieger. What do you think Scott Stringer has done well, and what would you have done differently?
One of the things I think Scott Stringer has done well has been adding transparency to some very important topics. So for example, he has been providing a report that actually one just came out very recently on how the city agencies have been investing in minority and women-owned businesses. I think that's very important for us to get that kind of transparency. I know some of you have seen, it was just recently Small Business Saturday. The amount of city business with small businesses is really low. We talk about small businesses, but we don't do it. And so one of the things I think that the controller has done well has been to help identify those issues. The thing that I would focus on is, now that we've identified these problems, working with the city agencies, working on the RFPs, working on the mechanisms to address the issues that we have identified.
A question from Adele Niederman. What role do you think the controller should play in alleviating the city's housing crisis?
Great. Actually, that helps me because that was my last point. So I think without question, we know the demand, we know the need that is out there, right? And I think the controller has to work with the mayor. The mayor needs to look at making sure that affordable housing is able to occur in the entire city. Some communities have not allowed affordable housing. They've kept their zoning as such that we couldn't have affordable housing. That needs to get addressed. But I think that the controller, through economically targeted investments, which is part of the portfolio, should be investing in actual, not only affordable housing for rentals, but also affordable housing for home ownership. We need to be providing opportunities for working class, everyday New Yorkers to actually own in New York City. And I think public pension funds, particularly a lot of those retirees, are people who need those opportunities. So I think it works both ways. And as I mentioned earlier, I was very involved with the fight around the Lucerne and making sure that the way the city treats our homeless individuals is not continuing to be this constant shuffling the deck. We need to provide permanent supportive housing, and the controller could invest in that. So I think there could be some significant amount of resources that are invested in providing permanent supportive housing for homeless individuals, and also affordable housing for those who need it the most, our seniors and a number of our low-income individuals.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid we're out of time. That's the 10-minute limit. So thank you very much. That's going to have to be the last question. And now I'm going to send it back to Lorraine.
Senator, very, very much. You're free to leave or free to stay, whichever you choose.
Thank you.
And now we will hear from City Council member Brad Lander from Brooklyn. Hi, Brad. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Lorraine, and the Three Parks Board for the invitation to speak. And thanks to all of you who are giving your evening to yet one more Zoom because you believe that much in our local democracy. It really is an honor to be here with all of you. I love the strong organizing tradition that Three Parks has nurtured through decades of hard work. My first introduction to a lot of you was 15 years ago when, as director of the Pratt Center for Community Development, I got to work with you supporting your successful community-based planning effort to win a downzoning of 51 blocks of the Upper West Side that has prevented irresponsible development in the years since. And I share your passion for building a more progressive and livable city and for nurturing a healthier democracy. And that's why I'm excited to share my vision for the Comptroller's Office in the hard and important years ahead. The perspective I bring is informed by my background in community planning at the Fifth Avenue Committee in Brooklyn, as well as at the Pratt Center, and in my 10 years in the City Council, where I've led some big fights, winning a fair work week for fast food workers, a groundbreaking living wage for Uber and Lyft drivers, and the Freelance Isn't Free Act to protect freelancers like a lot of you from wage theft. We've created some of the strongest protections in the country against tenant harassment, holding reckless drivers accountable with an innovative new program, implementing participatory budgeting, passing the strongest independent expenditure disclosure law anywhere in the country, strengthening New York City's campaign finance system, and finally bringing ranked choice voting to New York City. And in all of that work, I've fought to make government work better, both by working closely with community leaders like you and by taking a good hard look at the data. Even before the COVID crisis, we were already in a time of peril for our democracy. Gaping inequalities have left us fractured and so far from our ideals of equal justice or opportunity, and short-sighted politics have left us unprepared for crises. So now we face the greatest challenges of our generation, In the months until vaccines are widely available, we must do better to manage the crisis, to save the lives of our neighbors, of seniors, communities of color, frontline workers who keep being the hardest hit. Beyond the pandemic, we face the challenge of securing a just and durable recovery. We've got to do more to help millions of struggling families who can't pay the rent and are standing in long lines just to get food. And we've got to do more to save our devastated mom and pops, which is why I'm fighting for a small business recovery lease program, both at City Hall and in Albany, which has a real chance to help our small businesses and which we can do now, even without federal assistance. We face a severe budget crisis that requires making hard choices. And I've made those hard choices as a member of the council for the past 10 years. But as we also know from Keynesian economics, we need to make smart investments now in long-term rebuilding. Out of past crises, New York City's leaders pioneered investments in clean water, public transportation, affordable housing, and higher education. And those investments, even out of the Depression, out of crises, were the platform for our city's growth and success for over a century. We can and must do the same today with investments in clean energy, sustainable urban innovation, public health, the arts, because we can create hundreds of thousands of good green jobs and help bring our city back to life. But all of that requires that we make government work better, because government can't deliver on any of its promises when city agencies are run poorly, when money is wasted, when results aren't clear, when projects aren't completed on time, when there's no accountability for mismanagement, and when corruption goes unchecked. Now, I'm running for comptroller to help our city rise to those challenges. The tools of the comptroller's office, making sure we're spending public dollars and investing public pensions responsibly, making sure our agencies are working more effectively, addressing claims against the city more thoughtfully, can help us confront our city's biggest challenges, that economic recovery, the affordable housing crisis, achieving public safety with less police abuse. I voted against the city budget this year because I believed it did not do enough to cut the NYPD and that our public schools have paid the price. And especially, since the comptroller is the office charged with taking the long-term view on our city, the climate crisis. We did not see the COVID-19 crisis coming, and we've paid for that failure in lost lives. We know the climate crisis will be far worse, so it's on us now to mitigate and prepare. The 8 years that the next round of elected officials will serve are going to be the critical ones. The mayoral candidates will all talk about the threat of the climate crisis, but on most days, other issues will seem more pressing. So we need a comptroller who will hold us accountable to our climate goals. That's why I put out an ambitious, detailed plan to make the comptroller's office a hub for taking real action now to protect our planet and ready our city. That means divesting from fossil fuels, investing in renewables, reducing emissions, transitioning to clean energy, and building resilient infrastructure to create good jobs for New Yorkers and focus on climate justice to tear down disparities. You can see that and our other plans at landerfornyc.com. Just to conclude, we can and we must make government work better and more consistently with our values so that our city delivers for all New Yorkers and not just the most fortunate ones. I'm delighted to have the chance to ask for the support of Three Parks today because I want to continue doing that work alongside you and because I really believe the comptroller's office can make a real difference in these critical fights. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. This is Chuck again. We're going to go to the questions. And let me start with a question from Tim Eckersley. Given the budget gap, do you favor increased city income tax for the super rich?
I do, although it has to be passed in Albany. So I really hope that Senator Benjamin and Senator Parker and Assemblymember Weprin will go win that in Albany right now. We do need a tax on billionaires, either on wealth or on income. I think I'd really like to see us do is close the carried interest loophole that protects private equity and hedge fund managers in a way that they only have to pay half the taxes of me and you. There are a bunch of other ways that the wealthiest, the most fortunate New Yorkers can do more to contribute. Unfortunately, all of that has to be done by the legislature. The city has some things in our control. Some elements of the property tax, some other things we can do, and I'm happy to talk about creative strategies, but a progressive taxation on millionaires and billionaires, that has to be done in Albany.
This is a question from Wendy Diller. She says, how will you use the powers of the office you're running for to make the tax system more equitable, given the city's limited powers of revenue raising and the financial difficulties that we're now facing? Please be as specific as you can be.
That's a great question. So first, I mentioned one example. So that carried interest loophole, that's between $1 and $2 billion a year that just goes to private equity and hedge fund managers because they're allowed to treat their income like it was investment dollars, even though it's income, just like yours and mine. There's not been enough focus on it. That has to be changed in Albany, but the controller's office can do really good economic analysis that helps build the case. You organize with people on the outside, you help win change. So there's use the economic analysis to push for those things that have to be done in Albany. And then there's bring a lens to do smarter things here. So I'll give you one example. The Independent Budget Office today said it's another time for the city to take a look at waste, at garbage, and think about whether we need to move to a pay-as-you-throw system that gives people an incentive to recycle and compost, that gives people an amount that everybody gets to throw out, but that also produces an incentive for people to recycle and reduce waste. And for the largest producers of waste, requires that they pay for that privilege. And they estimate that that could bring in several $100 million and that it would actually be a pretty progressive piece of revenue. So that has not been thoroughly analyzed either in its waste impacts or in its economic impacts. It's exactly the kind of thing I would like to do in the controller's office.
This next question asks for specifics as well. Where in the city budget would, considering the crisis that we're in, where in the city budget do you think you would make cuts?
Yeah, I love the push for specifics and not letting any of us off the hook. I mentioned the NYPD in my remarks. I was one of those people that thought we could make significant cuts there. I was one of the first people just to call for a hiring freeze even before George Floyd was killed. We don't need to be hiring more police officers in this pandemic when we have got a hiring freeze on teachers. So there's a lot of room to do policing smarter. I put out a detailed plan that I'll also drop in the chat, which looks at how we could do traffic safety smarter. Right now, we send cops to do traffic safety enforcement. They don't like to do it. They don't really do it that well. It costs a lot of money, and we don't get lives saved. I passed this bill, the Reckless Driver Accountability Act, that uses the cameras. There was a horrible crash in my district where a 1-year-old and a 4-year-old were killed. And it turned out the driver who killed them, we knew from camera data already was in the top 1% of most reckless drivers in the city. So let's use the camera data to identify those super, super reckless drivers, give them an opportunity to change their behavior before they kill or injure our kids and their neighbors. And we could actually do it more affordably than we're doing now with policing and save a lot more lives. And just one more quick example of this. One thing the controller's office does is settles claims against the city. The two largest kinds of claims are claims for police misconduct and claims for traffic crashes caused by city drivers. So what the controller's office should be doing is figuring out how we're gonna work with the new data released by 50A about police misconduct to have less of it, because we don't want people abused and we wanna save hundreds of millions of dollars. And the same on crashes. The Department of Transportation actually took action and reduced crashes, but other agencies have not. There's a real opportunity here to manage government in a way that both saves money and produces better outcomes, and in these cases, even saves lives.
Thank you very much. That's going to have to be our last question. So again, thank you, and I'm going to send it back to Lorraine.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Brad.